Morning. Today I have been working on pencils for Into the Impossible, the next 4 pages, so 8, 9, 10, 11. This scene is the first meeting of the two main characters, the romantic leads. And the first 3 pages, 8, 9, and 10, went pretty well, but I got to 11 and I scrapped my thumbnail completely, tried out a new layout directly on the board, and realized that it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. Came up with a better idea the other day, like first thing in the morning I woke up and it hit me. Story-wise, I was doing stuff that I didn't really need to do, so I streamlined it, because I have the two characters running from the living room of the house down back into Idris's laboratory in the basement, and then starting up the rest of the scene. And I realized that that really wasn't necessary, because it's basically them exiting the scene. They could do it right there in the living room using Idris's transporter. So, one of the things that experience has brought me is that when instinct is telling me that something's not working, I should listen to it. A lot of times what happens is that I feel like something's not working even when I can't necessarily pinpoint what's wrong. And then, sometimes I gotta set stuff aside for a while and come back to it a day or two later, just to let, thoughts kind of percolate and see what I come up with or what I can pinpoint is wrong, and then fix that, whatever the case is. So something that I decided in this scene is that I had too many shots of the camera behind the characters. Like, this is behind, this is behind, this is to the side, which is the one shot that is to the side, and this would be to the front. But she's kind of in this long, knee-high shot and not very close up, so it's, the balance there is a little bit off. And then again from behind, and this, I like the general shot of them, you're just pulling him into this, it's a wormhole, which closes out the scene. But this sort of foreshortening with the arms, because this is like shoulder, hand, arm, it's extremely difficult to pull off convincingly. Even if you draw it anatomically correct, it still looks screwy. So it's just one of those extraordinarily difficult technical shots, and sometimes it's better off just to not do that. So this whole page ends up not working the way I want it to, so I get out the big eraser and I'm just going to scrap the whole thing. Sometimes you just got to do that. And it's easy to get, super attached to a drawing. Like this is pretty well drawn. I did the same thing over here on this page. I had a different pose, and it was, it looked aesthetically pleasing, but it just looked wrong. It was out of balance. Her figure work was out of balance. And I had this arm reaching across to go shake his hand, which is what happens in the next panel, and this foot was popped forward, so both of them were moving forward at the same time, and it was just completely out of balance, despite the fact that the drawing was, it was a well done drawing, aside of the fact that the balance was completely wrong. So I ended up scrapping that one, and then, erasing it and going back and redrawing that particular figure. And that took me quite a bit more time than I had expected, but the result was worth it. So that's one of these things that at the pencil stage, I try not to get too wrapped up in the details anymore. I generally leave that for the ink work. And just sort of lay in stuff and not, not get too finicky, because it's just, unless it's something that I feel like I would probably screw up in the ink, I'm not going to worry so much about it. This book I'm taking a little bit further with detail and cleaning up than I normally would, because I don't have the luxury of using whiteout as much. Like, I can use it here and there in small, tweaks and fixes, but I can't use it in large areas on the page because I'm doing watercolor on the page, and it's going to screw it all up if I try to do that. So, strategically what I'm thinking here is do the work in the pencil, ink the outlines mostly, and then, add in some black where I feel is necessary. But let the watercolor do most of the form work, most of the depth work. Well, line work does a lot of depth work, but it's a lot different strategy than I've typically employed. But along with that requires a good solid layout to build on. So I have to make sure that that's correct, and that's really true at any type of any media that I might use to make comics, because if the camera angles are wrong or the composition's garbage, it doesn't matter how many details or what kind of clarity you put on top of that, which is a huge thing that I'm working on now for myself, is being better at composition. I used to be very finicky about perspective and try to get all the pieces to look correct in three-dimensional space, and that ended up forcing me to put stuff in weird spots sometimes, and it didn't really compositionally work, because I was more worried about getting it quote-unquote right than I was about making it compositionally pleasing. And when I dictated or let the perspective work dictate where things were placed, it threw the balance out sometimes. So, that was something that I started working on for myself for this as a goal, focusing more on getting things in the correct places on the page, which is actually a huge part of why I'm still using the blue line board instead of using blank board, because the blue lines are going to cause a bit of a problem in printing. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to address that, if I'm going to clean them up in Photoshop and take them out. But, right now I'm using those blue lines to help me figure out better composition. So I feel like that's fairly important for me to use this paper. If you are a comics creator and run through this process and end up in a similar situation, something that maybe, if you aren't sure you want to completely erase a board like this, because honestly it takes a bit of courage to do it, you got to trust that you're able to do something better if you do. Maybe just get a blank one instead. Keep this on the side. I'll do that on occasion when I'm not sure if I have a better idea or not. And that's when it's important to have, enough spare boards, because right now I don't have enough to even make this book, but I'll order some more, so it's not that big of a deal. And then, just go to a clean board and see if you can come up with something better, and if it works better, great. You can erase the original or move on to the next one, or if it doesn't work better, go back to the first, or try a third one. Sometimes that has to be the case too. I've done that. But, understanding what a solid layout is, where composition is important, and especially in this case, camera angles, because that's where I really screwed up, was camera angles. Usually you don't get to a super finished stage before you realize, hey, something's not working. It's still just layouts right now, or just breakdowns in a couple of these panels. So I don't feel extra sentimental about it. I don't feel like I'm losing much. And, you know, and this wasn't a lot of time that I put into this page for work. So maybe 2 hours at the most for what you saw there. So, you know, it's not like, oh my gosh, I just lost a day and a half of work or something. But I have the luxury of doing this for myself, so I'm not on a strict deadline. You know, I want it to be done by a certain time, but I also have learned that, you know, given a good chunk of my time is dedicated to being a stay-at-home dad, I can't just, you know, come down and work every single day. Sometimes I gotta let things flow a little bit more than I care to. Sometimes I gotta be alright with taking a couple days off, like I did this weekend. Because yesterday was Father's Day, and I ended up getting involved with some stuff going on family-wise that didn't work out the way I wanted. And then Saturday I had a class with my student and decided to just kind of relax the rest of the day and do some sketching. Alright, so getting down to the nitty-gritty of this scene, what I had written again was that Idris and Clint have just met. Clint shows Idris a video of Clint's daughter Becca being stuck in some sort of slow motion. Idris decides she wants to see this with her own eyes, and initially what I had written at that point was that they run down to her laboratory. She grabs this wormhole generator that straps onto her arm, opens up the wormhole, and then goes to Clint's house. In this instance, I decided that going down to the laboratory really is not necessary. Especially because one of the main plot points of this story is that she has wormhole pockets in the dress that she's wearing. It's sort of a running joke throughout. And so I could have her just pull the wormhole generator right out of her pocket right there in the living room and not really slow the story down at all. Because the point of the scene is getting them to the house, not getting them in the basement. Alright. I really liked the composition of the big wormhole at the bottom. But I feel like that backwards scene, or backwards shot of the two main characters' backs didn't work right. So now I'm thinking maybe character acting. I had Clint being very hesitant to go into the wormhole and Idris dragging him. I feel like that's not necessarily appropriate for the gist of the scene. That he would be concerned about his daughter's safety and be more okay with going into the wormhole, even though it's a very strange experience for him. So I have not thumbnailed this, even though I probably ought to, so let's see what I can come up with on the spot. That's the wormhole. Center. That's too, I don't want it to. Yeah. I want it more three-dimensional. I want it to look like a tunnel. So, like that. haven't exactly figured out the design for this. Moreover, trying to render something that's 4 dimensions, I guess, in 2-dimensional space. That's one of those artistic issues that you're like, what do I do with that? The other thing about this shot is that I had Idris on the right every other panel, or excuse me, on the left every other panel, Clint on the right, and then this scene I flipped them on accident, which that creates problems with things like word balloons and just general consistency of flow. So now I'm trying to figure out a good composition of maybe I can have Idris in the center here and still maybe still dragging, not dragging Clint, but definitely kind of pulling him along. What do I write? What did I write? It's 11. Panel 5. Idris and Clint hand in hand walking into wormhole. Okay. Since she's in front, how tall do I want Clint to be relative to Idris? He's a little taller than her. Half a head. I guess that works. Okay. About half a head taller. Hand in hand. Let's see. Hip. Walking. I'll give him some tension. Like the thighs are above the live area, so that's a little better to see. That hip's forward, so this arm's back, that arm's back, so this hip thigh is forward. I don't like to put, especially when they're different height of characters, I don't like to put their legs in the exact same positions as 2 characters. So like this, that's Clint, maybe there. And it's a much wider gait, which suggests he's moving a little more intensely. Let's see. And then for Idris, I'm going to turn her a little bit more toward the wormhole, because this is sort of at a, let's see, the horizon line would be like there, so that's sort of how the perspective is working here. This will be, I think, my focal point. Give her shoulder a little more twist and push this forward a little bit more. These things are sort of, are useful to imply how much movement is involved, how quick or how dynamic the scene is. If I get things laid out correctly at this level, just being, you know, very basic forms, then usually the next step of detail works out much easier. You know, and that's one of those things, like I had said earlier, that just is instinct. the hips, that's the shoulders. That would be, whoops, that would be the hips here. Because this is the foot with weight on it. So that's higher, that's lower. So that's the basic, maybe an arm out here. You know, sort of a protective. With this arm, if I put it up here, that's a little more pensive. If I put it down, it's less. Hi, I'm recording.
You know,
Okay.
I can hear you talking from upstairs.
Okay. I love you.
I love you.
Have a good day. Alright, I think I like this up higher. Alright, I'm creeping up on 20 minutes here, so the virtues of living in an older house. Hear every single footstep, every single little creak and crack. Let's put her head further up. Yeah. So one thing that I see, even, you know, professional artists will do a straight up and down neck and be like this. Human necks don't work that way. Our spines push forward at the jaw or at the skull, and even when we're standing up straight, our necks tilt forward a bit. So this is the spine here, and it comes down here and goes back. It's a, you know, it's like an S curve, 1S, 2S, 3, and then, you know, stops at the pelvis. So that's, you know, a general shape to be aware of to get correct. And then you can, as you push that head forward, it creates even more tension in the figure. You know, and it doesn't really take that much either, but that's something that you can manipulate to demonstrate various emotions. Hey darling, what's up?
While I was watching the movie, I had like throw up and I had bran flakes for breakfast. And it was like we were mashed up that and the milk.
Yeah, well, you were laying like with your head half off the couch and you were basically upside down, sweetheart, so that is going to cause that.
But I wasn't doing it. But I wasn't.
It was a different time?
Like yeah.
Alright, well, how are you doing now? You okay?
I spit it out in the tissue.
Was that just now?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been happening more and more.
My mom's been giving me half a tongue.
I don't have any Tums, sweetheart.
I know, I was just telling you that.
Okay.
I'm gonna go pee and then get, but while I'm going pee, can you try to find me a medicine, because it's just been really, really bugging me, and it's been going
I
really...
don't think we have any medicine for that. Do you...
Just try to look for it.
Did you get a drink of water afterwards?
No. We'll do that.
Yeah, do that. Okay.
I'm gonna go pee, so I'll just take a drink of water. I'll pop it in there.
Yep. That's my life. Okay, I don't think he's got it. Alright, I'm getting close, but I'm not quite done there. I can tell when I'm getting warmed up because I become less noodly with my pencil. I become more specific with the lines. Also, I'm finding that this is not in proportion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, nope, not in proportion at all. But that's fairly easy fix in this figure, I think, because it's the head that's too big. Alright. Alright, so I'm deliberately going to stop noodling with this anatomy and move on to composing the rest of the page because I am running short on time on this video, first of all, and secondly because I know that I'm just noodling with it right now, and the composition, the placement of the figure is basically there. Alright, now the question, what do I do with the other panels? So we got sees the video of the girl of his daughter, looks at it, looks closer at it, takes the phone, says she, let's see, this one she declares what's wrong with it, or what's going on with the daughter. I think I need to fix the eyes in that. So this one, let's see, I've got, I think I'm going to go out just a little bit more, and then this will give me something to butt these panels against. I liked the columny out layout of that. I think, let's see, Clint's on the right. I want Clint staying on the right. So let's try, that's Clint's face. Maybe holding, no, that'd be too small. Holding the phone still. What's the line? He just says, need to see this. With my own eyeballs, which is not how I would letter that at all. That's too. Maybe I'll pull that and just make it a single shot. Or he just stands. Let's see. Should be digging in with this hand into her pocket. Let's go mid-arm into the pocket, and then this hand. So I want her really kind of stretching into that pocket and impossibly close, or impossibly far down. So I haven't explained the pocket yet. That happens in the next scene. And since I'm doing this on the fly, changing the scene, that means that I have to be aware of what repercussions come along. Let's see, dress, this hip, foot. How's that? So this arm terminates at the pocket because it's going in a wormhole. So I'm going to have it not drawn in Usually I would draw it in underneath with the form and then build the dress on top of it, but in this case I'm purposefully doing the opposite. Actually, let's move. One thing I've been focusing on as well for composition is having things on the third marks and the half marks on purpose. Like here, this figure is almost on the half mark. This one's slightly off the third, or on the third, which, you know, went a little bit further than I might have normally done. But I like the balance there because they're going into this open space. There's no dialogue balloons to contend with. So in this instance, I'm going to take what I did and move it up just a bit. Mark that there. This is the hand, this is the pocket. It's kind of on the half mark for the panel, and I'm not really using the trim mark, I'm using the live area as the quote-unquote half mark. Just to keep myself in better balance. Let's see, elbow, shoulder, head, that's a shoulder, that's an arm there. I want to keep this arm inside the trim line this time. Breasts, ribs, which I should have put those in first. Let's see. Okay. Let's put more emphasis on that shoulder. She's really reaching in there, like ridiculously far. Okay. So hips, again, this would be the leg holding the weight. What is she doing with this leg? Cocked out. Dress, hair. Let's see. What about the rest of the room? So, Clint, I think I'll pop his head in there a little bit and give him kind of a weird surprised look. Let's do shoulder down here. He's like, what the hell?